Before we dive into the questions, just want to take a second to say thank you to Susan and Mark from the Museum of Arts and Sciences in Macon and the Knight Foundation for their support of this pilot project. It is only with them that this is possible, and so thank you very much. Okay, so Matthew, if you could sort of give an overview of the on a human scale and the origin story behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. I had been living and working in China for about 3 years, which was one of the most inspiring periods of my life. But I was there really constantly confronted with being sort of the other in a really, country that's very homogenous, and I was very much the outsider. So that was actually really inspiring and sort of forced me to confront, like, what is my identity? Who am I? How do I exist in the world in relation to other people, coming from the United States, where I was more in the majority. And lots of great, fruitful work came out of those years in China. But I then moved to New York City. And if you've been to New York City, you know it's like one of the most diverse places on the planet. And I listened to a lot of Philip Glass, who tends to use humanity as an instrument, uses choirs in a way that are almost mechanical to sort of create this, like, what you would do with a piano or what you do with an orchestra, the human voice. And so I found myself walking through the villages in New York and then through Midtown with my headphones on, listening to Philip Glass and hearing those beautiful arpeggios with the human voice from Einstein on the Beach, those types of pieces, and seeing all of these. I was just overwhelmed by the diversity of New York, not feeling like I was the other anymore, but also not feeling like I was the majority, feeling I was just like one out of many different types of people. And as that music sort of was hitting my ears, it blended with all of the faces and different people around me of different ages, ethnicities, backgrounds, religions, languages. And it was just sort of like, wow, humanity is an instrument, and each one of us is a note within that instrument. The idea became very clear to me really quickly. And I was like, okay, how do I make that happen? How do I bring that thought, that idea, that concept to as many people as possible, so they can feel that and realize that they're part of this bigger instrument, and sort of witness the interconnectedness of all of us through the power of music. So yeah, I started to pursue that, and I didn't have any of the technical abilities at the time. I brought the idea to NYU ITP, which is an interactive arts program at NYU, to their summer program, where I got a grant and to bring it to life. And there I connected with some really amazing people who taught me the sort of basic skills to bring it to life. I used a software called Isadora, which is for live theater performance. Actually, it's to trigger lighting and video projections for live theater performances. So it's not really coding, but it's kind of like a hacky way of coding. I was just using whatever tools I could really get my hands on, and that allowed me to basically take a MIDI, which is electrical inputs from a keyboard, to this software that would allow me to trigger videos. And from there, I was like, okay, I've got the technology I need. Now I just need to fill it. And so I hit the streets of New York with a camera, and basically just started to post up in different areas. Spent a lot of time in Washington Square Park, spent a lot of time in Central Park, spent a lot of time in Prospect Park. And just tried to hit up every borough of New York for a few days each. And there I would just approach people on the street and say, hey, can I sing with you? Can we sing some notes? And they put in front of the camera, and we'd sing scales. So start with a middle C, and then kind of work our way up or down, sort of figure out where people were comfortable in their range. And then I would sing the note, they would sing the note, back and forth. And so we had thousands and thousands of notes. Took those notes and basically brought them all into editing software, and have a musical background. So I just started organizing them by notes. So here's all of the C's I've got. Here's all the C sharps I have. Here's all the D's. And so I had basically hundreds of notes now organized. And there's a lot that had to get thrown away because they weren't on pitch. A lot of people, everybody can sing on pitch, but what my approach and what I discovered is that everybody can sing at least one good note. And so I was finding who has that one good note. That person only has the F, so they kind of have to be the F. So then I have to get rid of all the other Fs and make sure that whoever it didn't have that note, it needed to be somewhere else in the scale. Once I had those organized, I was very adamant that we didn't use auto tune or any sort of post processing on the voices to make them hit the notes. Because I'm like, everybody has that one good note in them, so they should feel natural. And those slight imperfections are actually part of the beauty of I think the instrument has turned out. We live in a very like commoditized musical environment, and everything is perfect and dialed and quantized and auto tuned. It's perfect. So I wanted it to be clear that this was not over manipulated. Organize those all, and then once I had a scale that I felt was good, and I could just hit play on it and hear like then I brought it back into that software I mentioned and basically mapped it to that keyboard. And once I had a first to 24 scale, 24 note scale, so 2 octaves, including accidentals. And as soon as I started playing chopsticks, I was like, okay, we've got something here. This is really cool. I could see the faces popping up and singing the chopsticks, and then I was like, I gotta go bigger. And so through collaborations like Tribeca Film Festival and then eventually Wonderspaces really allowed me to kind of scale the piece to what it is today.
Thank you for that, Matthew. There are a lot of really interesting choices in the piece around using an antique harpsichord, using sort of the projecting on individual tiles for each of the faces. Can you describe sort of how your process sort of led you to make those choices along the way?
Yeah, the harpsichord, was a really conscious decision that I didn't want people, even though technology is really key to how this thing works with the MIDI and now it's built on, when we brought it to Wonderspaces, we moved it from Isadora into processing in different pieces of software. And I didn't want the technology to feel like it was central to it. I didn't want people to feel like they were playing with a piece of tech. Rather, I wanted them to feel like they were having a musical and human experience. So finding that antique harpsichord was key to that. So like kind of hiding the technology inside of it so that you felt like you were just having this magical experience of playing a note and then seeing it come to life in front of you. And then I was always been really invested in making sure that the people felt big and central to it. So really inspired by like old school organs, pipe organs, where the architecture of the space actually is what is the instrument. So you see those big pipes around you, and that visual presence of the instrument is actually part of it. There's also some amazing studies from the 1800s and even some modern ones of people who made color organs. That was very inspiring to me, where they had attached notes to different lighting elements within cathedrals and spaces, so that as they played the organs, the cathedral space they were in would light up. So that idea of you being immersed in the visual representation of the music was a big inspiration for me. So those kind of tied together. I'll say one funny anecdote about the harpsichord was, this was like a Craigslist find, like trying to find somebody who was selling a harpsichord, and it was the most gutting experience to gut that harpsichord because it was such a beautiful instrument, and only because like it's gotten to live on so long through this partnership with Wonderspaces and now with Macon, like that I feel I've like finally gotten rid of my guilt of literally clipping the strings of that harpsichord, and feeling like I was taking the life of that instrument away. I feel finally, after 8 years later, that it's gotten probably more use than I ever would have gotten in the dusty basement where I found it. So I feel not so guilty about it.
Nice. Mark, looks like you have a question.
Matthew, could you talk a little bit about your musical background and how that led to the making of this piece?
Yeah, absolutely. So music was definitely the beginning of my creative journey. I grew up singing. And that singing led to me being in bands, but it was always based, my origin was always based like as a choir boy in Catholic church, and then learning, being classically trained for opera, part of school programs and competing in Texas in like, statewide singing competitions. So really classically trained musician, but then that took me into bands and playing, singing live in bands. Those bands then needed content like music videos, t-shirts, and that sort of attracted me to be like, how can I extend the life of the band into other creative mediums? So I started to make music videos for the bands, which led me to film and studying film. And that pursuit of film and studying film led me to ultimately making interactive work. I started learning software. I was like, oh, wait, I can do more things with these films. I can trigger them. I can make websites with them. And all of that work came together and on a scale where I was like, the musical piece now with the interactive piece came back together in a really interesting full circle way for me in my career, where this beginning of music that I grew up with and singing in choirs and singing with other people and that feeling that led me on this creative journey to technology, really then circled back while I was using technology to sort of recreate those formative musical experiences I was having in my childhood.
Well,
Maybe if I could ask a follow-up. How do you refer to the people in the piece that are singing? So if I'm understanding correctly, so you're a classically trained singer that then went to the bands, and now you're incorporating other people in that. So how do you refer to the other people in the piece, the people doing the singing? How do you refer to them?
I mean, they're people first and foremost, but I think when I think about it as a piece, I think of them as notes. So I can imagine, who is the D and the G in my head, even after all these years. So, and that was, kind of back to that initial idea that came so clearly, which was like humanity's instrument, each of us is a note. So like thinking about humans as notes became, hey, in groups of humans, that's kind of like, those are chords, right? And chords are sound beautiful together. You can make, and then lots of notes together in order, make compositions, right? And the metaphor of it sort of like, you can, if you let yourself go a little bit, you can really kind of take the metaphor really far in terms of like organizing groups of humans in order, is how we create societies and civilizations. So yeah, notes are the atomic unit of the piece and sort of the metaphor of
I can see the overlap with Philip Glass, Koyaanisqatsi, that thinking about cultures and the people in the cultures and then representing them as notes. An important part of this is that we can help others to have a similar journey as you've had. If someone was to ask you, how can I do this? What would be your response? How, not this piece, but how can I find my own journey?
Yeah, it's such a phenomenal question. And I get asked by this from a lot of young creatives, and it's such a tricky question because I think everybody's journey is different. I think the way I'm wired is really that I only know how to follow the things that are interesting to me. I have a novelty seeking brain that really is focused on, okay, I haven't done that before. That seems interesting. And then where does that take me? And based on that, that opens up new possibilities. Which one of those seems most interesting? And sort of falling forward, following the way my brain is wired to want to taste new experiences and find the stimulation of new experiences. Think I've been really fortunate to like let those find the common thread between those so that they build upon each other. And that's sort of what I would suggest to anybody is like, there's no wrong decision, but if you can, in terms of following what is interesting or excites passion in you, but can you make each next step build on a part of the previous step so that even if you're following novelty and stimulation, you're not just shooting off in every random direction. You're making at least one step building on what came before. And that's what creates, I think, threads in artist careers and creative careers and in bodies of work. It's sort of like building on what you've done previously. It's easy to say, follow your passion, and then people's passions can be easily mixed up with what's stimulating, and what's stimulating can change so quickly. And then you end up just shooting off in a zillion directions. So I would say, yeah, follow what is just interesting to you. And then when that chapter feels complete, let the next chapter be new, but an extension of what came before. That's sort of how I've gratefully lucked into the experiences that I've had so far.
Matthew, related to that, I think with the future audience of this conversation, there may be artists who are interested in exploring the creation of installations or interactive installations, and you you alluded to sort of learning the technologies as you went and exploring those, and I think I think that there'll be other artists who might view this who have that same sort of challenge, or maybe even sort of fear of, okay, well, there's all this world of technology, and how do I dive into that? Can you talk about sort of like how you approach that? You mentioned sort of talking with the ITP folks, or what you would recommend for maybe sort of related to Mark's question, but specifically for that. How do I dive into learning the technologies to be able to realize my work?
Yeah, I mean, has to be the best time in history to have an idea. Like, there's so many possibilities of how you can make things and bring them to life, and there's so many resources to try to learn about them, right? Like, and that's changing, and getting more and more rich in terms of how you can learn things every single day. So, I would say, don't be afraid to start small. That's a really key piece. I think all of those early experiments of on a human scale were tiny. I was using like a tiny little MIDI keyboard, and even the first installation of it was a tiny toy piano where I took that 2 octaves and I put that inside of a toy piano and plugged that into a laptop, and the laptop was right there, right? And so you could see the software, and it was just like, it was very duct taped together. So don't be afraid to start small and experiment and learn from those failures. Embrace all the rich information and education environment that we're in. You can look up anything on YouTube. You can talk to a chatbot about anything to help you figure out a process or bounce ideas or think about what technology might help you unlock an idea. But above all, like, finding a community is, it kind of trumps everything. If you find those people around you that are working on things that have a similar glimmer in their eye, then you can bind together, and, multiple people working on something together can do anything. So if you can find those communities where other people are curious, searching for answers like you are, then that's how you sort of build momentum, I think. And I mean, New York is obviously, have a head start there in New York to do that kind of thing, because there's so many people there to make things. But I think you can find that anywhere. And sometimes it's even stronger in smaller places that have smaller creative communities, because the people who are there and committed to making things are super committed because they're standing out. They're like the black sheep. So when those people find each other, it's extremely exciting. I experienced that, in Texas as well. It's like, okay, everybody is really into sports, and that's how you stood out, and that's how you kind of stood apart. It's like, okay, I'm into making things, creative things, and finding those other people that was like not sort of in the mainstream of what was the cool thing to do. Those people were really committed because they had to also stand out and had to kind of like be outside. And so the human component can't be understated enough. You can learn a lot from others. And when you combine those two, each of you kind of go off at night and figure out and research and come back together and be like, yeah, I learned this cool thing. Oh, I learned this cool thing. Let's try to stick those together. The power of collaboration is incredible. So, yeah. I'm happy to wax more on that if there's more specific questions, but it's an exciting time to be around.
Maybe if you could talk a little bit more about that. Macon's a small city, and one of the responses that we've gotten to people to the Wonderspaces pieces is, wow, this is a lot of technology. I don't really understand this, but I'm a creative and I don't know how to jump into this. Like, I can see where this artist is, but I'm so put off by this. It's sort of like your duct tape it together comment, but how do we do this as Macon? How do we do this as the museum? How do we duct tape this together for others?
Do you mean like the presentation of the work and people understanding how the work is made, or rather providing resources for them to make work of their own?
I think the hope for the collaboration is that people can make their own work, and they can see this as a stimulus for them to jump in. And right now we're trying to figure out the best way to do that. You mentioned NYU ITP. I mean, it's a fantastic program. We don't have anything like that here. There's sort of not that community already here. So what's the best way for us as the museum and as Macon to move this forward?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. I think especially in communities like that, bringing people together, not just like throughout the day, but in concentrated moments, is really helpful, right? So if there are technologists in the community and there are artists in the community, bringing them together to like, yeah, have a panel, have a talk, have a presentation of the work, and then leaving time afterwards for people to collide. That's a big part of it, right? So then some artist who has an idea, who has no idea how to execute it, might meet some coder or engineer or IT by day person who just like is a tinkerer and doesn't have an idea, and they could work together. Those kinds of things I think are a good way to kick it off. I would say there's also like for artists who just really want to dig into technology, like this is one of the most exciting things happening with generative AI and large language models is the ability for designers, visual artists to basically start to create code with plain language. And I see this with a lot of incredible designers in my community who have always been amazing visual artists. They can do amazing things with software to create incredible visual works. And even sometimes animate, right? Those are not just static works, they can make them animate, but they've never been able to make them interactive because this is like a chasm that you have to learn to code. You have to learn these whole other like ways of thinking about the moving image. And now through some of these models, they're able to basically describe the interaction that they want to have with their art piece. And that generates code. And then they can basically run that code without even needing to like debug it, you know? And all of a sudden, anybody who experiences that artwork can drag their mouse out of it, around it, and it will change the artwork in the way that the artist had hoped for, right? And these are non-developers; these are visual artists who are pushing it. And so, workshops around that, I think that's it's the most accessible that technology's ever been is right now. So workshops around that, I think, would be, you know, finding someone in the community who knows how to do that, or someone outside the community who can give a workshop around that kind of thing of like, this is the easiest place to start. And from there, if you have that kind of start, that can be your breeding ground for interesting ideas, and you can scale up from there. Like that's the duct tape of today, I think, is sort of these language models. You can get to these prototypes of ideas, and then, okay, this wants to live online. This wants to be physical. Okay, so now how do I think about getting this physical, this digital experiment I've got into the physical world? Is that on a screen? Is that on a projector? Is that through speakers? And start moving outwards from that initial prototype inside of the computer. That's where I would start if I was starting today.
So what I'm sort of gathering is it's going back to that the notes are the people, and then keeping that idea as the thread as you build the technology, and then having workshops that, you know, can keep referencing back to that seed and build on that, if I'm understanding correctly.
Yeah, I mean, I hadn't connected it back to the piece itself, but yeah, I think the metaphor does tie together of, yeah, this is, and yeah, you start with, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and then over weeks and months, you build to Elise or Chopin or some other more complicated, yeah, combination of notes and people working together. I think that's a cool way to kind of bridge them. Yeah.
Wonderful. You know, Matthew, I wonder if you could chat about sort of your artistic journey and how it's led you to your role at Google as part of Google's creative lab, and how you sort of work with technology and creativity in that space, but also sort of how you carve out space for your own artistic practice and how those work together sort of as a professional who has a job that also exercises creativity and an independent artist that does your own work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're so highly interrelated, and I feel like it's been a secret superpower to have both sides. They feed each other. I mean, quite literally, on a human scale is how I found my way to Google's Creative Lab. The first like sort of large presentation of the work was part of Tribeca Film Festival's interactive program. And I had a friend who I had met just through random connections in New York, who was a cellist and composer. And I was like, okay, we had a little bit of grant money for the premiere. What if we composed what if I had him compose a piece using on a human scale, sort of as the central instrument. And he was super excited about it. So he brought in a quartet of string players and around on a human scale, that's the central instrument, and then composed a piece for that group. And he just happened to be the composer for so many of the like seminal pieces of work from Google's commercial work. So when we had the premiere, he invited a lot of the people from Creative Lab to the premiere, and I met a lot of them. My day job was working in agencies and making commercial campaigns, and then my passion outside was making these interactive artworks. And Creative Labs kind of does those two things, and they were like, "Whoa, what are you doing? What are you doing over there at the agency? You should come over here. This is exactly what we do." And so it took me a few years to realize they were right, and then I ended up over there, and I've been there for 7 years. So quite literally, like affected. It was sort of like a calling card into this big leap in my professional career. But then I would say even before that and since then, the two sides are essential to feeding each other. The doing commercial work has absolutely allowed me to see the like personal work, artistic work through a larger, ambitious lens. You get to work with bigger budgets in the commercial world, or I do at least. Some artists have the same size budgets, but I get to work with larger budgets within the commercial world that allow me to see how the large scale productions unfold. And I don't think having not worked in the commercial world, I would have been able to sort of see on a human scale as like a bigger, more ambitious, immersive piece, because I saw how to make things like that through my commercial work. And then vice versa, so many commercial people working in the commercial world, I think their work becomes quite static and dry because they're sort of like, eating from the same trough. They look at commercial work, they make commercial work, they look at more commercial work and award shows that are commercial work, and then they make more commercial work, and just sort of like becomes this snake eating its own tail. But for myself and others who I know, it's like having an artistic practice outside of it lets you have this totally different way of thinking, this totally free and open way of thinking where you can make anything. You don't have a client, right? Your client is your own brain and curiosity. If you can bring that lens into the commercial world, it allows you to have ideas that just stand out and break apart. So the two sides absolutely feed each other. It's sort of a yin yang, and I wouldn't do it any other way. I mean, it's definitely overwhelming in terms of like, and Jason knows this. It's like, I've always got a lot going on. It's sometimes hard to get a hold of me. There's too much on my plate to have both sides cooking, but it's absolutely like I wouldn't have it any other way because they feed each other so well. So yeah. And then now I think like I'm able to do almost what I would be doing if I even if I wasn't getting paid for at the Creative Lab. As AI kind of becomes more and more present, these models become more and more present, I see people in my community sort of in fear of them, like writers, starting with writers, then visual artists, now filmmakers, sort of seeing how these models come online, like, wait, can this do the thing that I can do? And so we found a space within Creative Lab to basically bring in artists and visionaries in their field, put the models almost in raw form in front of them and be like, okay, this is not a company telling what tool you need now and how to use it. This is a company being like, here's the raw technology, like, what is it good for? Help us understand that, help us discover it, help us shape a tool that would actually be beneficial to you and let you explore new creative possibilities. And so we've done that with writers, with rappers, we've done that with visual artists, doing it now with filmmakers, we've done it with musicians. So I feel really privileged to be able to literally on the other side bring in the artistic community that I know into the world that I operate in a professional capacity.
Wow, thanks for that. I have so many questions about sort of where you see the making of art going. You mentioned sort of the hurdles to sort of entering the technology being the best that they've ever, or lower than they've ever been. But with your experiences as an artist, your work at that sort of vanguard where it's all coming together now, I guess, do you see art making having like a different character or form 5-10 years down the road because of the rapid sort of introduction of technologies that fill in different places or make certain parts easier or different?
Absolutely. I mean, it wouldn't be art if it didn't, right? Like that, its evolution based on technology is nothing new, right? It's just maybe a higher rate of change, higher acceleration of change. Like painting before the advent of the camera was sort of like a service industry. It was like portrait painting because there wasn't pictures of people, right? And painters had to be highly skilled because so they could paint people, right? Or document scenes, architecture, because there was no other way to document it well. The camera came along, basically displaced that work, right, in a major way. And probably a lot of people experience kind of a fatalistic moment at that time, like, wait, what am I here for? But what became of painting is what we think now of like contemporary art, right? And abstract painting, everything that came post camera is like the mind blowing painting that I think of when I think of painting. Obviously, think about Renaissance and portraiture and all the amazing work before the camera, but like without the camera disrupting that, you wouldn't have Kusama or Picasso, or you can make your own list of amazing contemporary painters who found ways to evolve the medium based on the technology. So where it's going, so yeah, that's just to say that's one example of many. Digital video is another one that I experienced when I was in film school. Right? When I was in film school, everybody was like, digital video, Final Cut Pro, you can edit a movie on your computer, you can shoot it like with a camcorder, like this is the end of film, right? It's gonna ruin everything. Like cut to 15 years later, it's like YouTube, the explosion of content, people can make anybody be able to tell a story, all these different types of stories coming online. And on top of that, film didn't go anywhere, right? It got like richer and more interesting, and so many more storytellers being able to tell stories at a high quality level. So yeah, sorry, those are just two examples. There's many more, but where does it go? I get a lot of these thoughts from artists that we've collaborated with and like kind of brought in. With the visual arts, there was two insights that really came from some artists that we were working with. When you think about the fact that visual models, image models, can more and more every day faithfully like reproduce works of art that feel like an artist's work of art. We basically put the technology in these artists' hand to be like, gave them the thing that lets you most easily reproduce an artist's style. Give the model one image, and then you can just text prompt like you would any of the image models you might have played with, and the result will be that text prompt rendered in that artist's specific style. So the scariest technology for an artist, right? Like this is the Xerox copy of like a fine artist. They like sat with it for days. How can they use this? They trained their work on it. They started prompting against it and seeing what could happen as they started text prompting in their own style. What does that open up? What does it change? When they feed it different things, what comes out? What it opens up these questions of what is style, right? Like what is an artist style? Do artists have multiple styles? They have one style? What's a signature style? Yeah. The thing that came out of it is that the possibilities it opens are scale, and artists being able to think about, wait, if I use this technology, I can render tons of work, way more work than I would be able to render with my own two hands in my own style, a style that I would basically call my own, to tell stories or create murals or make things much bigger than they would ever have the time for in a day. And so that manifested as a project called Infinite Wonderland that we did with visual artists at Google. And basically what the project ended up being was these artists creating styles based on Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, like one of the most, visually reimagined stories of all time. They created something that they would faithfully call like their style. Like, and every time it reproduced an image, they were like, yes, I would call that my piece of work. And we made it such that, the original Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, shipped with 22 illustrations by John Tenniel, who's a British pen and ink illustrator. So only 22 scenes in the story out of 1,200 sentences are rendered, right? And this actually came from my daughter. I was reading her Charlotte's Web, which is similarly illustrated, right? There's like a dozen illustrations in Charlotte's Web, and she kept being like, "Why isn't there a picture of that part?" And I was like, "Oh yeah, why isn't there a picture of that part?" And this is while we were working on this project with these artists, and I brought them that question, and they were like, "Oh wait, yeah, we could basically map our style onto this entire book." And so the way it ended up is that you can click on any sentence in the book. The reader can click on any sentence in the book. It then sends that sentence as part of a prompt, which then gets embedded in a bigger prompt that includes that artist's style, and then sends that to the image model, which then returns an image that's about that specific scene that no one's ever seen before. So every time the reader experiences it, they're experiencing an entirely new piece of work. Also, that artist has painfully crafted to make sure that every time they produce something new, they would say that's in my style. So we did that with 4 artists, and that's Infinite Wonderland. And it's meant to just be a glimpse of what the future could be. It's sort of like here, come take this apart and try to make new things out of it and work with it yourself. The other insight, and we kind of done a ton of work on this with artists. Oh, with this technology, I could invite my audience, my fans into my work, right? So the easy way to imagine that's almost a mural in an artist's style, but anybody could add to that mural, right? Like, I want to see an octopus, I want to see it, whatever. And like all of a sudden that artist's work comes to life with the ideas of their fans and community, but it is cohesively in their style. We haven't explored any projects in that light, but I could see this technology opening up that kind of collaboration between artists and their fans. Yeah, so there's just a few reflections.
Super fascinating. As we approach the end of the hour, I just want to make sure that any questions anyone has can be thrown out there. Is there anyone have any questions for Matthew? Please, Susan, go for it.
Yeah, I had a question, Matthew, just, coming from the museum sector and side of things where archiving and preserving work is so important to culture and community. And, when we're in this phase of just rapid advancement of technology, I also think about this being kind of a digital dark age of sorts where we're moving so quickly through different forms of digital preservation that, things are, we're digitizing all of our paper, into these digital forms, and then those forms are becoming obsolete almost like in real time. I mean, how do you see your works like this being preserved, moving forward, and how should archivists and museum professionals be thinking about, protecting and preserving these types of digital works? And
Oh my gosh, it's such a good question with so many different aspects to it. I mean, I feel like with work like, particularly like on a human scale or this kind of like large scale physical interactive work, it's like the challenge has not even gotten to the archival state yet. The challenge is like, how do you keep something around for a year, a few years, right? And I feel like the work of Wonderspaces and sponsorships and grants that like fund this work to be able to exist for longer is like miraculous, and sort of like already that groundbreaking. Is just like, how do you consistently present the work is like the biggest question, because every work is so varied and the technology setup is so different. So, I mean, the best, and I mean, Jason and Julia would speak to this better than me, but like, I feel like the best opportunity with work like that is documentation, right? Like, make sure that you capture the way that it looked in as many ways as you can, photography and video, but then also make sure that you capture the way that it was built inside the computer and how it's set up, diagrams, and clear documentation of how the software works, and obviously, archiving the files. Yeah, but it feels like that's, all that stuff is key to presenting the work consistently over time. That Wonderspace has been, I think, really a pioneer in like, my work would not continue to exist if it wasn't for our partnership. So I'm like less concerned with archiving, more concerned about like just the existence of it. So archival more broadly, that was really interesting. Like, if I can take it there, the
I'm not sure if it's for everyone, but I think your audio just went out for a second, Matthew.
Can you hear me okay? Sorry about that. The Dark Ages thing is really interesting. If I can just take it somewhere else, the notion of archive and just of like how much exists on the internet, right? It's almost like, to me, a Dark Ages that there's so much that this flood has happened, right? It's like a flooded age. And this is even before AI. Everybody's like, oh, AI is going to cause this flood and we're not going to know like what you can see, what's real, what's not. And it's like, to me, that flood happened already. That flood happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? Like the internet's been exploded with so much content that in a lifetime, you couldn't even scratch the surface of it, right? Like that's the Dark Age to me, is that we're buried in so much that you don't even, but I've seen some glimmers of experiments that are super interesting to me. One is another sort of like AI angle, which is called multimodal search. So using AI to understand, let's think about it as a video, right? The AI watches the video, and instead of you doing like metadata tagging of like, oh, it's a video of a horse running through a field in Ireland, you still could do that kind of tagging, so you could have a very concrete level of search through an archive, but it's taking understanding from that video based on the language model. And so we built video archives as an experiment to be like, what if I search sad, right? There's nothing in the metadata about sad. And then all of a sudden it will pull these videos that like, A, have people that literally look sad, or B, have like sad feeling moods, gray skies, sort of like rainy days. Like, what if I search red, right? Some of these might be tagged red, but they're not necessarily all tagged red. And I get this like brilliant shot of like this red caterpillar crawling across a leaf, or I get this, red piece of artwork. So that ability of the AI to see and understand works of art in archives, I feel like is something that has yet to be really operationalized and tapped into. But I think it could unlock or be a glimmer of hope in the sort of Dark Ages. Like, it's hard for anybody, even archivists, to see and understand everything that's being created. So can we use tools that allow us to see the work in similar ways how we might see it if we had seen every piece, to explore those archives in a way that's more natural to us, and explore that like inhuman amount of content in a more human way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Maybe if I could ask, how do you see the role of museums changing with this future, with AI, with this type of more experiential work? What becomes the role of a museum with that?
I mean, I think more than ever, curation is so important, right? It's like when there's infinite amount of things, it becomes essential that like we have a way of understanding what's important amongst those things, and that there's all different ecosystems that can be bastions of those points of view, like why those things are important, why people should pay attention to this thing versus the 90,000 other things they could pay attention to in that instant. So museums as bastions of like curation and points of view on the world, I think, are essential. Being able to create works that can be experienced in physical space in a world awash with people just like bending their necks and like giving stress fractures to their thumbs. Like, it's so important to offer people physical experiences where they can come into a place and be around other people, to experience things, to have conversations around them, and be immersed in them. So those two pieces to me are, yeah, will never lack for that need in society and culture. I'm sure there's many more, but those are the two primary ones in my mind. And yeah, I mean, third is obviously like we're here because of not just curation, but of people taking risks and putting work into funding and presenting work, right? And so that allows work to exist, not just curating work, but work to exist that never would have existed were it not be for people taking a risk on it and putting energy into raising funds and putting labor into making it come to life. So that would be the third leg in my why museums rock stool.
I think Megan has a question.
Yeah, it's not so much a question. I just wanted to thank Matthew for explaining how a piece like On a Human Scale comes to be, to understand what goes behind it in terms of idea as well as fabrication and organizing, something like that. It's very interesting to know that. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, thank you for the opportunity to reflect on it. It's been a really lovely hour, really great conversation, great questions.